it's a bit like a stress dream being told, okay, they're going to fill the Conway Hall with people and we want you to come out and talk about your most painful feelings to them. So all I need now for stress dream is to look down and realise I'm not wearing any trousers, I'm not even going to look. So I might be a little bit less slick than I normally am, and I apologise, these are difficult things to talk about. All the time I was researching this book, I kept thinking about something that happened to me, and I didn't understand why. It all seemed like an irrelevant thing at first. I was researching another book around the same time, the time I started doing this, which I've not written yet actually, and I was in Vietnam. And one day by the side of the road in Hanoi, I bought an apple from a seller. I'm really bad at haggling, so I paid like $5 for an apple. And I went back to the hotel room. It was called the very charming Hanoi Hotel, and it was very charming. And I ate it, and I was so tired, and as I ate it, it tasted like the way, you remember those post-nuclear war films like Threads? It was what I imagined when I was a kid that food would taste like then, right? But I was so lazy and tired, I ate about half it and then threw it away. Anyway, you can guess what happened next. I was like volcanically sick for like 3 days. I was lying there in front of CNN. And on the 4th day, I said to my fixer, Johann, look, I've only got this limited amount of time in Vietnam. I've got to go and meet the people I was going to interview. Just take me. So I had to meet survivors of the war, the American invasion of Vietnam. And we drove all the way out. That was about 5 hours into the countryside. And we were interviewing an old woman who was the only person with her children to survive from her whole village, the war. And I can picture her really clearly. She was in her, I think it was late 80s. She had like stained red lips from chewing something. She moved around on a plank. She was telling this really interesting story, and as she began to speak, I just exploded, right? I'm not going to go into more details, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. And I'm kind of lying there just on the floor. I felt the worst I've ever felt physically. And this woman said to my translator, he's really sick, you need to take him to a hospital. And I was like, no, look, I lived on fried chicken for 10 years in East London, I know what food poisoning's like. Just take me back to Hanoi, I'll lie in my hotel bed, this will just pass. And he said to me, Johann, this is the only woman who survived the Vietnam War from her village. I am going to listen to her medical advice over yours. We're taking you to the hospital. So I was taken to the hospital, and I go in, and my translator starts saying like completely false things. Like I was the only Westerner they'd ever treated there. And he starts saying, this is a really important Westerner. If he dies, he will disgrace our country. And so by that time, I felt like the whole room was kind of moving around me. It was spinning. And I felt really, really strange. And they start asking me all these questions, and they said, what did you eat? And I mentioned the apple. I then discovered that apparently, this is useful travel advice, apparently you can't just wash an apple. In Vietnam, you have to cut off the peel because it's so soaked in fertilizers. And I remember when he told me that saying, not fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides. And I remember when he said, that would be a really interesting investigative piece. And I thought, oh no, I'm about to die. I'll never get to write it. And then I thought, I had the most insufferable thought I've ever had. I thought, oh, I'm about to die because of a poisoned apple. I'm like Eve and Snow White and Alan Turing. And then I was like, your last thought proves that you are a pretentious twat, right? Anyway, I had really bad nausea, extreme nausea. The whole room is spinning. And I said to the doctors, please give me something for this nausea. I can't bear this feeling. And they were still asking me questions. And the translator, explained to me, the doctor was saying to me, you need your nausea. It's a symptom. It will tell us what's wrong with you. We need to listen to it. Anyway, they gave me treatment. Turned out what happened is because I hadn't absorbed any, kept any liquids in me for 4 days, I was extremely dehydrated. I was like a person who'd been in the desert. They gave me a drip. I was fine in a couple of days. And they said to me when I left, if you had actually gone back to Hanoi, if you tried to drive back to Hanoi, you would have died on the way. So that signal that I didn't want to hear saved my life. I'll come back to why I thought about that a lot later. The reason I wrote Lost Connections is because there were these two mysteries that were hanging over me, and I was really frightened to look into them. The first one was, why was I still depressed? When I was a teenager, I went to my doctor and I explained that I had this feeling like pain was leaking out of me and I couldn't regulate it and I couldn't control it, and I felt really ashamed. And my doctor told me a story. My doctor said, we know why you feel this way, it's been proven by scientists. There's a chemical called serotonin in people's brains. Some people are just naturally lacking it. You're clearly one of them. If you take these drugs that I'll give you, it'll boost your serotonin levels, you'll feel fine. I felt fantastic when I was told this story. I left, not very far from here actually, I swallowed my first pill, I remember it really clearly. And it was a little white pill, and I remember as I swallowed it, it felt like a kind of chemical kiss, and I felt this tremendous sense of relief. And even when it couldn't possibly have been the chemicals, because it doesn't work like that, you don't get the feeling the second you swallow it. And for a few months, I felt really significantly better. And then the pain started to kind of come back through, started to bleed back in. And so I went back to my doctor. He said, clearly I didn't give you a high enough dose, we'll give you a higher dose. And again, I felt a real amount of relief. And again, the pain started to bleed through. I went back again, he gave me a higher dose. This pattern continued until for 13 years with a couple of short breaks. I was taking the maximum possible dose. And at the end of all that, I was still depressed. And I was really reluctant to admit it because I thought there must be something wrong with me because I'm doing what our culture tells me to do. And I still feel like this. The bigger mystery, which is much more important, is why are there so many other people feeling like this? 1 in 11 people in Britain is taking antidepressants. There are a huge number more people who are depressed and anxious who are not taking antidepressants. There seemed to be an enormous rise in depression and anxiety, which I later discovered there is evidence for. And I began to think, can it really be that all of us just have some kind of chemical malfunction in our brain? If that's true, why have our brains started to malfunction more? What could be happening here? And it's a sign of how reluctant I was looking to, because if you have a story about your pain and your distress, even if that story doesn't actually work for you very well, it structures your pain, right? It's like putting a leash on a rabid animal. At least you think, well, okay, I know where it is, right? And if that story seems threatened, it's an extraordinarily destabilizing feeling. And it's a sign of how reluctant I was to look into this, that I wanted to start writing this 7 years ago. I decided it'd be easier to write a book that required me to go and meet hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels, right? I found that less frightening. And I ended up, excuse me, sorry. I ended up doing this research. So it ended up being a really long journey. I went over 40,000 miles. I went to loads of places. I interviewed the leading experts in the world on the causes of depression and anxiety. And I went to places that just had really different perspectives. From an Amish village in Indiana, because the Amish have extremely low levels of depression, to a city in Brazil that banned advertising to see if it would make people feel better, to a lab in one of the leading universities in the United States where they were giving people the active component in magic mushrooms to see if that worked with depression. Ask me about it afterwards if you want. And I learned lots of things. I think the most destabilizing and difficult thing was the thing I suspected I might learn at the start. Very early on I learned that story my doctor told me is not true. So Professor Andrew Scull at Princeton University says the idea that depression is just caused by low serotonin is deeply misleading and unscientific. Those were his words. Dr. David Healy, one of the experts here in Britain, said to me, you can't even say that story was discredited, because there was never a time when it was credited. There was never a time when half of the scientists in the field would have attributed people's depression just to low serotonin. And that was really shocking, because for all sorts of reasons, and I can go into some of them if you want to ask about them, but I then looked at this more, and so that depression is measured by something called, now it's important to say, the fact that depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance, which is the position of the World Health Organization, the UN, does not mean there is no value in the drugs that I took. We can actually measure how much value there is. Depression is measured by something called the Hamilton scale. I always felt slightly sorry for whoever Hamilton was, because that's all he's remembered, how much misery people have. But so the Hamilton scale goes from 0, where you'd basically just taken a tab of E, to 51, where you'd be profoundly suicidal.